The war to end all wars ended nothing. It left behind not peace, but a seed, humiliation, economic collapse, radical promises, and a man who would drag the world into darkness. This is the story of the war that consumed the world. To understand the Second World War, you must first understand the peace that preceded it. The Treaty of Versailles had crushed Germany. War guilt, crippling reparations, territorial losses, military humiliation. Then came the Great Depression, millions out of work, hope evaporating. In times of desperation, people turned to those who promise solutions, scapegoats, national pride, a return to glory. In 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Democracy died, dictatorship rose, and the world slept. Hitler had written his plan years before, in a prison cell. He called it Mein Kampf, My Struggle. The world should have read it. German soldiers marched into the Rhineland, a direct violation of Versailles. France and Britain did nothing. Austria was absorbed into Germany by threat, not by vote. The world watched. Hitler demanded part of Czechoslovakia. Britain and France agreed if he promised peace. He promised. He lied. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. This time, there was no more room for appeasement. The Second World War had begun. This was not the static, grinding war of 1914. This was Blitzkrieg lightning war. In 6 weeks, France, the most powerful military in Europe, was defeated. Britain stood alone. Hitler's next target was Britain. But first, he needed control of the skies. For months, the Luftwaffe bombed British cities. The goal? Break British morale. But Britain had Winston Churchill, and his words became weapons. The RAF defeated the Luftwaffe. Britain survived. Hitler turned east. In June 1941, Hitler broke his non-aggression pact with Stalin. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, began. This was war without mercy. Hitler saw it as a racial crusade. Stalin called it the Great Patriotic War. Winter came. The Germans froze. The Soviets counterattacked. Moscow did not fall. Stalingrad became hell on earth. When it ended, over 2 million were dead, and the German Sixth Army had been destroyed. The tide had turned, but Europe was not the only battlefield. In the Pacific, another war raged. Imperial Japan sought its own empire, resources, territory, dominance. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor. The next day, America entered the war. The Pacific War was brutal jungle, disease, and an enemy who rarely surrendered. But the war was not only fought between soldiers. Behind the lines, the Nazis committed the greatest crime in human history. The Holocaust was murder industrialized, factories of death, built with the same efficiency that produced tanks and planes. The world learned that civilization is a thin veneer. Beneath it, darkness waits. On June 6, 1944 D-Day, the Allies landed in Normandy. The liberation of Europe had begun. In April 1945, Soviet troops reached Berlin. Hitler killed himself. Germany surrendered, but Japan refused to surrender. The Allies faced an invasion that could cost millions of lives. Meanwhile, in secret, the United States had developed a new weapon, one that would change war forever. On August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb destroyed Hiroshima. 3 days later, Nagasaki. On August 15th, Japan surrendered. The Second World War was finally over. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. 85 million dead, more than half of them civilians. The war that consumed the world ended in 1945. But peace did not come. Instead, a new kind of conflict emerged. A war fought not with armies, but with ideology. A war that could end humanity itself. The Second World War was the crucible of the modern world. It gave us the atomic bomb, the United Nations, and a divided planet. It showed us what humanity is capable of, both the worst and sometimes the best. The question that remains: have we learned anything at all? The war ended, but the fear did not. A new conflict emerged, fought with spies, threats, and the constant shadow of annihilation.